Sunday, January 22nd, 2023. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. A strong winter storm will be developing later in the week, has the potential to bring 6 to 12 inches of snow across the southern high plains. This is something which is occurring in an area where it does not normally snow, and there's certainly plenty of children looking very forward to this. This is really just a potential because the situation is so complicated. It's so hard to make a forecast for this area. It really is, and it's going to remain that way. And in fact, really what it's going to come down to is there just is not enough cold air in that area for it to produce snow unless there's heavy precipitation rates. That brings down the dynamic cooling. It brings colder air from above down to the surface. So you're left with a situation of when the precipitation is going to be falling lightly, it's going to be falling as rain. If the whole thing falls lightly, the whole thing is rain. But if the precipitation falls heavily in some of these cities in Oklahoma and Kansas and parts of Missouri, the precipitation will be falling as snow, and it will be falling as heavy snow, and the heavy snow will accumulate. So we're going to have drastic differences all over the place in regards to the snow amounts because there's not enough cold air again for the precipitation to be falling as snow. It's going to be producing its own cold air, and that's dependent upon the precipitation rate. So it's difficult to forecast. I don't even know if it will ever be so forecastable, but the general idea, you could expect anywhere from 1 to 12 inches of snow. You have perhaps even some areas may not get any snowfall accumulation, but some areas may be receiving up to a foot. In terms of how widespread that is, that's a big question. Usually in order to get a 6 to 12 inch snowstorm here in the Midwest, you need the northern stream to phase with the southern stream. You have an Arctic high pressure system with cold air up in the north, which collides with the warmer air down south with deep low pressure, which tends to develop over in the Colorado area, moves on south into the Texas area, and then collides with copious amounts of Gulf moisture. This thing has even more moisture than anything because this system is moving down the Pacific, going into the Arizona area, into New Mexico, into the Mexico border, and is going right into the Gulf of Mexico. It goes into the southern states. It really is going into like moisture alley, if there is such a thing. This thing has it certainly has the ability to pick up tremendous amounts of moisture, more so than anything we've seen so far this year. That's the storm track it's taking. It has that potential to do so. The problem again is on the northern side. Not only is there no Arctic air, even the cold high pressure that does exist on the backside, there's going to be some type of a separation between that air and the air which is hitting the moisture part behind the storm. So even then, we're still going to have difficulty getting the precipitation to fall as snow. Nonetheless, to just sit back and think that nothing's going to happen would not be such a responsible thing for a forecaster to do, because we've seen some phenomenal stuff which has gone on the past couple of weeks in this country. Usually we say that there's not going to be big storms. The polar vortex is locked up, all the Arctic air is locked up. So we're good to go. There's not going to be any big storms until the Arctic air finally comes back down, which is probably going to be happening actually the beginning of next week. There's questions as to how long that's going to last. Is it going to be just a one quick shot, two quick shots, or maybe longer? A lot of questions in regards to that. But there is an Arctic front on the way, which certainly will be felt in the upper Midwest. It will be felt somewhat really everywhere, but the upper Midwest, it's the Arctic feel will certainly be in the upper Midwest, and I think even in the Chicago area as well. That's for the beginning part of next week. We have a storm system that's going to be developing then as well, along that front as well, a solid storm system. That's the type of storm system, the one over the weekend. If that thing should collide with Gulf moisture, that's the type of thing where you just say, we have the three ingredients necessary to produce a major winter storm. Here in the Midwest, it's Arctic high pressure, copious amounts of Gulf moisture, and a deep low pressure system. If that comes together, we have it made a major winter storm is 6 inches or more. That's for next weekend. This system here in midweek, well, we take a look at last week's system in midweek. We didn't really have the cold air, but we got the cold air anyways, and we got a 2-foot snowstorm out of this. Some areas in Nebraska picked up 23 point some inches of snow. Despite the fact that the Arctic air remained locked up, we still got a 23 point some inch snowstorm from a Colorado low that moved across the Midwest last week. Even though the cold air was mediocre cold air, there was questions from the beginning as to what was going to happen, but the potential existed from the beginning for this to be a heavy snow event, and it certainly was, with many, many areas getting well over a foot, so many towns getting a foot or more, and many, many towns getting really at the 14-inch mark. That's when you release the reports, above 14 inches. There's plenty of places that got above 14 inches, but when you hit 14 inches, that's really where there's an enormous amount of towns. It's just, so many reports of 14 inches, so many reports of 12 inches, and many, many reports of 10 inches as well. And that's for places around the North Platte, Nebraska area, and we had some area, Lexington, Nebraska as well, and we did have some location that got above 23 inches. So the question is, what about this week? One would think this week it's even less favorable in regards to the potential snow. It's even less favorable than last week because of that gap that exists between the cold high pressure and the storm system. We have that little gap, which we didn't have last week. But in regards to moisture content, this is almost like riding along the Gulf itself. There's just enormous amounts of moisture. The question is, will the precipitation be falling as snow? And meteorologists feel that during the heavier precipitation rates, the dynamic cooling will be able to make this precipitation fall as snow. So that's going to be a major ingredient over here. The ingredient is heavy. If it falls at a heavy pace, the precipitation will be able to change over to snow, and if it does not fall at a heavy pace, the precipitation will be falling as rain. It could be a major rainmaker for places in Texas, parts of Oklahoma and Kansas. So there's lots of questions with this system, and I think there's always going to be lots of questions. Even while it's happening, there's going to be questions. This is the type of system where even when it's snowing in your face, snowing right in front of you, it will switch over to rain without any warning, then switch over to snow. That's the type of system that we're dealing with. But we probably will be getting a county or so that could end up with 12 inches here and there. And in general, to call it at 1 to 12 sounds like you're really taking advantage of the snowfall accumulation forecast system, where you could do something like that, because usually we don't do more than double. But 1 to 12 might be the real way to do it, or 3 to 12, but the standard 6 to 12 is just, it's difficult to do that just because we don't have that cold air. So you also have to realize we're dealing with a part of the country where a couple claps of thunder is also possible. So 3 to 12 inches, if you really have to put a number to it, 3 to 12 inches would sound about right, and that would get school canceled, especially for any area where it's going to be snowing during the night. Those are the places where we will see rapid accumulation, efficient accumulation on those highways and on roadways. This is for parts of northern Texas, parts of Oklahoma, parts of southwest Missouri. The Ozark Plateau right now is favorable for the highest snow amounts because temperatures are going to be colder over there. So that area has a much better chance of getting closer to 12. I think you could go ahead and say 6 to 12 inches for parts of Missouri, parts of the Ozarks, 6 to 12 inches. And then as you head east, eventually the system is going to run into the actual cold air, and going to feel much more comfortable to say 6 to 12 inches as you head off over into Indiana, perhaps, or even places further east than that. Ohio, places right along Indianapolis, right along the bullseye of this system of a 6 to 12 inch snowstorm for those areas. So what we are going to have again is the areas which are going to get the heavy precipitation. The very start of the storm in Oklahoma has a chance of going for 3 to 12 inches. Then as the precipitation, if it doesn't fall that heavy, then the numbers go way down because the precipitation starts to fall as rain. So you might start to see numbers under 6 inches. As you go into Arkansas, with the exception of the Ozarks, you might get a 6 to 12 inch over there. And then as you head east, that 6 to 12 inch becomes more widespread. It becomes the bullseye of 6 to 12. So that's what looks like it's going to be happening midweek. The colder air comes in behind it. We have Arctic air, which is coming in. We have our own Arctic little system, a storm system associated with the Arctic front coming in for the latter part of the week. This will be bringing snow, accumulating snow, a few inches of snow for places in Minnesota, other parts of the upper Midwest, including Wisconsin. The moisture from that system is coming from the Pacific. Usually these systems are moisture starved, not this one. Although it's not a Gulf of Mexico moisture storm system, but it does have moisture associated with it, and it is a solid Arctic front. We also have a multi-day snow event happening for the Black Hills of Wyoming and the Black Hills of South Dakota. A long duration snow event going from Wednesday through Friday. That's due to a mixture of Pacific moisture coming from the northwest flow of Pacific moisture combined with also Arctic air. Just lots of snow over the 3-day period. There could be over a foot of snow, but the QPF's probably less than a half an inch for each 24-hour day period. Will there be a warning issued? It could be, maybe yes, as we go through the week. Maybe no. It's just going to be the long duration that's going to be responsible for these heavier snow amounts. We should point out again to reiterate that there is a storm system that might be moving again through the Midwest next week. That storm system looks like it has the deep low pressure, the Arctic air on the backside, and it looks like it will be feeding into the Gulf of Mexico. The system moves across Missouri and Illinois on Sunday next week, bringing snow. Heaviest snow amounts are always to the north and the northwest of the storm track, which look like it will be portions of Iowa and Minnesota and portions of Wisconsin. Chicago should get in on the action at some point. It's very hard to call forecast this far in advance, but 3 to 6 inches for Chicago would be my expectation. That system would probably have a 6 to 12 inch bullseye when you have all those ingredients together, and the bullseye tends to go a little bit further north than Chicago. So we would call it for 6 to 12 inches. This is far in advance next Sunday for places in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, 3 to 6 inches for the Chicago area, something like that, and then more of a widespread 1 to 3 inches as you go further south. And we have Arctic air on the backside of that system. We'll have to wait and see whether that's the end of the Arctic air or is there more to come. It is not clear right now. Thank you for listening. I wish everyone a great week. Stay safe, have fun in the snow, especially for those people in cities that are not used to the snow and want to have fun, so enjoy. Now I just want to say a little bit about myself. If you look in my yearbook, my 8th grade yearbook, it said most likely to be a meteorologist. I was always into the weather. Weather excited me. It was it was the pulse of my blood. That was what weather was. It was a religious school. I went out into religious studies. I never did become a meteorologist. There are those who are disappointed. On this podcast, I hope to be able to at least channel some of my energy, and I don't even know what to call it, energy and love of weather into this podcast. You will now hear a 1-minute trailer. Several additional feet of snow is expected by Monday morning. We have a powerhouse typhoon which has developed off in the Pacific Ocean. A big shockaroo to many of you. This is especially true in regards to what's going to be going on in Alaska. We have parts of the world that are so hot right now. Temperatures are expected to go into the low 130s. Here we have a special guest on our show. What is your name?
Katabis.
A heat wave that's going to be headed to the Eilat area. We're going to have to wait before we get into the next excitement. We're going from one extreme to the next extreme. 27.1 barometric pressure. Feet of snow are falling in Japan.
Oh my gosh.
Weather. That's a time of celebration. Just Google weather with enthusiasm and they're all going to come up.